Good Monday morning. I am Genevieve Jones-Wright, founder and lead empower mentor of Motivation.In.Action, or MIA, and welcome to October. And kicking off our October conversation is the one and the only, I want to say exhilarating. I do. I don't know why that word is coming for everything that Mr. Brooks is, but exhilarating is what I'm going to stick with. My professor and the Exonerator himself, Mr. Justin Brooks, is in the building. How are you doing?
Best intro ever. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to be here with you wearing matching t-shirts and bracelets.
And we didn't plan this.
Did not.
No. That is the crazy aspect of it.
So tell us about the t-shirt.
Well, this is Exonerate, which is a license plate I came up with a number of years ago to represent the California Innocence Project, an organization that frees innocent people from prison. And our motto is to exonerate people who are deserving of that.
And this is not just a license plate that's on a t-shirt. This is a license plate you actually drive around.
Yes, you can see it in town. In fact, every lawyer in my office has a different sort of version of it. Some have the EX. I actually have Exonerator with an R at the end, but yes, I do drive that around town.
I just had to mention that because I think it's so cool.
Thank you.
So before we get to the heart of what CIP is and what it does, who is Justin Brooks?
A lawyer and a law professor, a father, a recent grandfather. I'm somebody who found a mission in life 27 years ago and have been dedicating myself to that since then, which is freeing innocent people from prison.
Oh man, the work. People talk about doing God's work, but you're really doing God's work. And you're doing God's work all over the world. So let's dig into the California Innocence Project. You founded it 27 years ago. Why?
So actually my work started 27 years ago with a case that I took on in Chicago. I had heard about a young woman on death row, and the article I read said that she was sentenced to death on a plea bargain. And I thought, how can anyone be sentenced to death on a plea bargain? And then I was a young law professor. I'd been a criminal defense attorney for a number of years. So I met with her on death row, and she was scheduled to be executed, and she told me she was innocent. And so I recruited some law students, and we started investigating her case and found out she was actually factually innocent, and yet she was scheduled to be executed. Fortunately, I was able to get her death sentence reversed. And when I did, I realized the value of working with law students on these cases because I was taking them to the prison. We were going to crime scenes. They were learning firsthand how to do this work that you and I love. And, it's a skilled profession that you really can't learn from books. So I moved to California. I started the California Innocence Project in 1999. And since then, we've been freeing innocent people from prison.
So your first case, who was the client, and is there a recent update you want to give?
Yes. So her name's Marilyn Malero. And in the first few years of litigating her case, I was able to get the death sentence reversed, but the courts wouldn't allow me to withdraw her guilty plea and bring the case back to trial. So she sat in prison for 20-some years while I was out here freeing other people. And every time I walk someone out of prison, I'd think about her, seeing it on the news, and every time it wasn't her. But I kept at it. I took it up to the Court of Appeal. I took it into federal court. I petitioned the United States Supreme Court. I went to the United Nations with a petition. I did 4 separate clemency petitions in front of the Illinois governor, and finally, in the last one, got granted. And she was released from prison 2 years ago during COVID, but it was just in the last couple of weeks that finally she was exonerated, fully exonerated, where the district attorney brought her case into court and had it dismissed. So it took me 27 years to finish that case. I started that case when I was 29 years old, and you can
And now you're 32.
That's why I love you. Yes, a little older than 32, but you're very close.
No, that's just amazing. And it really is just a testament to your persistence, your dedication, the love of justice that you have. I'm just in awe of the work that you do.
Thank you.
So California Innocence Project, we call it CIP affectionately, takes cases where?
So we do cases all over Southern California. We have a sister project in Northern California that deals with the cases up there. We get about 2,000 applications a year because California incarcerates more people than anywhere else. And we have a whole process of looking for cases where we believe we can win them.
So when you're a law student, it is a coveted position to get on with CIP. It is something that every law student wants to do. But even with all of the applications that you all get, you can't put on every single law student that wants to do the work, right?
Yeah, so we have a very unusual selection process where we literally give the student an investigation task to do. So we're not always looking for who's on law review, who's the best student in terms of academics. We're looking for tenacious, passionate people who are really committed to the work, because a lot of it is hard.
Absolutely. And so I said a little earlier that you were my professor, and this is why it's so hard for me to just call you Justin, because I want to call you Professor Brooks all the time. But you also co-founded an entire Master of Laws program at California Western where CIP is housed. And unfortunately, we don't still have that program. I really hope one day it will be back up and running, because I do credit that program for why I am how I am as an attorney and the skill sets that you all gave me before I ventured out into the practice of law. So just want to make sure that I say that here and now.
I'll also never forget you as a student. As I've told you before, you gave the best closing argument of any student I ever had. I still vividly remember you putting the weights on the scale of justice as you were doing your closing argument. And, you were a brilliant student and a brilliant lawyer. So it was my pleasure to be your professor.
Well, thank you for remembering me after all these years. It's been a while.
It's been a minute.
Some of the other things that you do is you work on anti-death penalty work, as far as getting California into a progressive space, really, where we don't have the death penalty. Can you talk a little bit about that work?
Sure. So Marilyn Malero, my client, was the 190th person freed from death row in the United States after finding they're innocent. She was the third woman freed from death row after finding that she's innocent. It's not about whether people deserve to be executed. It's whether we deserve to have that authority and power, because we've proven time and time again that we wield that power irresponsibly. It is a deeply flawed system, and we are an outlier among civilized nations with the death penalty. So I've been speaking out against the death penalty since I was in law school. I've worked on every campaign in California to get rid of the death penalty. We now have it suspended, but you don't know, it could come back. And it really is an international embarrassment that we talk about ourselves as human rights leaders, but the rest of the world doesn't look at us that way, because other civilized countries don't execute their citizens. Most people on death row die of old age. So why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this? How many people have you freed?
Personally, I've been able to walk 36 innocent people out of prison through my work and the work of the lawyers in the California Innocence Project. And every one of them, when you talk about the number 36, it does feel like a big number as a lawyer, but I also know for every one of those people, all the people surrounding them who are impacted by it, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the brothers, the cousins, the friends. And I also know in the cases where they got it wrong, the victims and their families and everybody that was impacted by that, because the wrong person was in prison, and sometimes the person who should be in prison is out on the street. So every one of these cases is powerful in how many people it impacts. And every one of these cases is a powerful statement in the flaws in our criminal justice system, which is why I'm so happy to sit here and talk to you about it, because people have to learn about these flaws.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's something we should highlight, have to highlight, because so many people don't understand that this is a part of our criminal legal system, that it is inherently flawed.
Yes, it's inherently flawed. I just finished writing a book called You Might Go to Prison Even Though You're Innocent. And each chapter, I look at a different cause. But we fundamentally, when we set the system up and say the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, not 100%, we know that there's going to be a gap there. We hope that that gap's going to be very small, but we already start with there's a gap. And then we put 12 people in a box to make the decision. They're human beings, so they're going to make mistakes. Then you add on to that corruption that we have within police departments, incompetent lawyering on both the prosecution and the defense side, bad science that we've seen over the ages being introduced into court that we now know is deeply faulty, bad identification procedures done by the police, false confessions being obtained by people. When you add all that together, there's a lot more wrongful convictions than people want to believe.
Yeah, unfortunately. And so next week, I'm going to actually be speaking with Herman Atkins Sr. And, his case for me really just shows the frailty of the system because of that range of human error. And then when you get the corruption, when you add in human bias, when you put in discrimination, when you think about the win at all cost mentality that a lot of prosecutors have, that a lot of members of law enforcement has, it's mind-boggling that so many people have so much faith in our criminal legal system so much that we call it a justice system.
Right. And I've started, exactly. In fact, when I first drafted my book, I had criminal justice system in there a few times, and then I went back, spell it, seek and find, and it was changed to criminal legal system everywhere I put it. And then at the conclusion, I talk about exactly that. What do we need to do to get to it being a criminal justice system and feel good about that? But Herman's case is an exact example of that, with tremendous bias going on. And I'm glad you brought up the point about bias, because I just talked about that yesterday in my criminal law class, that people are so resistant to the notion that they're biased. And yet bias is as simple as every time you open a door, bias is at play, because your prior experience opening doors will tell you how much weight to put on it, how to turn it, and all your experience is built into that. Like, humans can't survive without bias. But when we start applying that to people and making assumptions about them, which we do when we walk into a courtroom and see one person in the room in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, or when we see a police officer with a badge on, all that stuff impacts the criminal legal system and ultimately our conclusions. So everyone is biased.
Yes.
And we have to just start saying that and recognizing it in order to fight against it.
Absolutely. And I love that illustration, because that's something we do every single day without thinking about it.
Right.
And that's the point.
Right. It's a learned thing. Bias is learning. So bias can be a positive thing. I'm biased towards this learning process, or it can be a tremendously negative thing that can land people in prison for something they didn't do.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the frailties of the system and, why we even have Wrongful Conviction Day. So Wrongful Conviction Day is housed in October, which is why we are here. I just want to ask you, what was one of your biggest challenges as an exonerator?
I think my biggest challenge of the last 23 years, which I think you will truly appreciate, has been working with prosecutors. Because when I can work with prosecutors and we're both with the same goal of figuring out what happened, it is incredible how quickly we can get to the point of exonerating people and fixing what went wrong. But what I've found in California, and this is happening all over the United States, there's sort of two paths, like everything in life. There's two paths you can go on. And some prosecutors, in response to the work of the Innocence Project, have just said, you know what, we're going to fight them to the bitter end. If we lose in our habeas hearing, we're going to appeal it. If we lose the appeal, we're going to refile charges. And by the end of it, they'll probably end up taking a plea. And that happened to my client, Guy Miles. We litigated his case for years. We got him exonerated. This is in Orange County. And after he's exonerated, the district attorney just says, we're going to charge him again and see what happens at trial. And then the judge sets bail at $2 million. And so I have to tell my client, you can walk out of here today. They're offering you time served. Or you sit in here waiting for trial. And of course, I can't guarantee we'll win the retrial. I think we will, because you're innocent. And he had to take that deal. On the other hand, progressive prosecutors are working with me, and we're trying to find out exactly what happened. And that's the way the system should work. It's more the prosecutor's responsibility than me as a law professor with a group of law students doing bake sales to raise money to investigate cases. And yet we're the ones out there investigating, trying to convince them over and over again of the innocence, and they should be the ones doing the work. So I think that's been my greatest frustration over the last 23 years. But what I've learned in that process is it's not about people being malicious. It's about bias.
So you mentioned bake sales. I need to know, where can we donate to the Innocence Project?
CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org. CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org. California.
Not Innocence Project. You'll be donating
Not
to another.
InnocenceProject.org. That's a place in New York. We have 60 Innocence Projects in the United States, and they're all independently funded. And so we have to raise money through CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org.
Okay, so don't be like me and try to like abbreviate and sound cool. It's the let me say this, because I need y'all to donate. CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org. It is tax deductible. You can do recurring donations. You can do a one-time donation. Donate. People need to be free that deserve to be free. So that's my commercial.
Love it.
Now, there's some fun in being an exonerator. You have been pictured on the big screen.
I have.
Tell us about that.
So the movie Brian Banks, which is now on Hulu in the United States and in Netflix in most of the rest of the world, is a movie that was made about my client, Brian Banks. And he was one of the best football players in the country in high school, and he was falsely accused by a classmate of rape. And years later, she came forward to say that it never happened. And Brian ended up playing in the NFL for a short period of time after that, and he actually lived with my family as well for a time after that. So I really love the movie because it also illustrates how easy people plea and how most cases end in plea bargains. And we're no longer really a system of trials, we're a system of plea bargains. And that's because we've just built the system bigger and bigger and bigger so that it can't sustain trials anymore. And until we start pulling resources out of the criminal legal system and decrease the populations in prison and decriminalize a lot of activities that should be decriminalized and look for alternative sentencing, we won't have the resources to try cases and get the truth. So we have this amazing apparatus set up in the United States of trials, but we only use them in like 3 to 5% of cases. And the general public doesn't know that. They think people are all going to trial. What they don't realize is that most people can't risk going to trial because the sentences are so great if you get convicted at trial that they take that deal that's put in front of them. And that's what Brian did. He had an opportunity to maybe get probation on this deal. And if he went to trial and lost, he was looking at 40 years to life. So it's
a kid.
He's 17 years old. So he was looking at maybe getting out of prison when he was 60, which you and I both know he's probably not going to live to see that. Or this chance at probation. So even though he was innocent, he grabbed it. And that's a message people need to understand, that innocent people do sometimes plead guilty because the choices are just so bad that that's the better choice of two terrible choices.
Yes. So we could just end right there, right? That is a message for the masses. Just understand that point. But I have the $1 billion question for you. So you're going to drop some more gems.
Okay.
What is the advice you would leave for our audience today? You can take this as broadly or as narrow as you want to, but they're looking at this Motivational Mondays. They're starting their week. They're tuning in because they want to jumpstart their week on a motivating note. So what would you say?
I will say what I say to all my students. You have to find what you're passionate about in life. Now that I'm 57 years old and I've been at my career now for 32 years as a criminal defense attorney, I hope from this conversation, if nothing else that you've gleaned, I'm very passionate about what I do. I love what I do. I get up every day excited about what I do. And you have to find that in your life, because if you don't, it becomes a very long and boring life. And what I say to my students is, if you feel the same way about your job right now as you did about your job in high school, and you're looking at the clock waiting for the day to end, quit and find something else to do with your life. Find something you're going to be passionate about and you're going to feel good about at the end of the day, and the days will not feel slow.
Listen, there's nothing else to say. You have gotten your charge from Mr. Brooks. Didn't I say he was exhilarating? He's exhilarating and exhilarated because this is why he's able to do what he does every single day, making such a difference in so many lives. We didn't even touch on the Latin American work and all of the stuff that he does across the globe. Maybe we'll have him come back. But I know that you've been inspired and motivated by his story, and that's just a little part of his story. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I just adore you.
I'm so proud of you. I adore you as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Motivational Mondays. I'm going to see you next week, same time, same place, right here, with more inspiration to help you jumpstart your week. Now, if you found this week's conversation inspirational or motivational in any way, maybe you got a gem to carry with you throughout the day or the week, please feel free to like, comment, and share. Because remember, everyone can use some motivation. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'll see you next week.